Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson. We're back for another edition of the podcast after an extended hiatus. It's been a couple weeks. TJ, good to see you. Good to hear from you, man. How are things?
It's good. How long has it been since we've done one of these? It was pre-spring. Was it
Yeah, I
pre-spring?
want to say it was right before spring football, maybe February. I think it was the one that was it you, me, and Dylan jumped on, or did you and
I
I do
think
one
so. I
after?
think so.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah, we were talking media rights, and shocker, shocker, folks. A month and a half later, and the media rights are still just as blurry as they were a month or so ago. But good news is we got lots of spring football to get into. TJ and myself have been at a few practices so far this spring. We got lots of news on the quarterbacks, some of the good position group battles, what we like, what we've seen so far. So lots to dive into here on the big podcast today. But let's go ahead and start right with the biggest thing on the agenda, and that's spring football. Obviously, the Beavers had a few practices in March. I attended those ones, and then they broke for a couple weeks for finals and spring break. They've been back. TJ went to a couple practices for us since. TJ, what's kind of just been your early vibe of this team, getting eyes on them so far? And obviously, the biggest ticket item, what have you thought of one DJ Uyunglele?
It's been good to see the quarterbacks. It's a nice mix, and they seem to all be getting a pretty decent amount of run here in the spring. Not necessarily all with the first team. There's not a clear cut. They're not. I don't think they're really running like clear cut first team, second team here in spring. Mostly because there's some guys who just aren't participating in spring. So it's kind of, if you've noticed on our first and second team list, it's kind of a jumbled mess half the time of guys that are in that spot, which confuses me when I'm looking back at my notes after. I'm like, well, that doesn't really look like a first team. So I'm just going to shrug and just say we got two different teams running out there. Regardless, it's been, I haven't gotten to see DJ flash all that much. They've been kind of conservative here in the two practices I've seen. They're really not letting us see a whole lot of the second session, not until the spring game. We only get one more chance to see these guys
Yeah.
before they take the field for the spring game on the 22nd. Aiden Childs, though, wow. I mean, for everything I'm reading that he's supposed to be a project passer, he has really spotted up some nice passes, especially when I was there on Tuesday. It was cold. It was wet. I was miserable.
Yeah.
Like normally we're taking notes right on our
Sure.
notepads, right? No, I had to do it on my phone because if I pulled out a pen and a notepad, those notes were gone. They were going in the trash. So I was doing it on my phone. I'm like trying to
Yeah.
type through all the rain and water on my phone. But
Beavers Edge
Aiden
appreciates your
Childs,
dedication, TJ. We appreciate
Aiden,
your dedication.
Aiden Childs is moving around in the pocket and
Sure.
throwing some deep balls that, if you haven't read the Nugget report yet, please go read it at
Yeah, please
BeaversEdge.com
do.
and check it out on the damn board. I mean, I highlighted in the first 2 points because it was just so clear how much arm talent there is there,
Yeah,
and
it
there
really
was some
is.
pretty surprising accuracy. Again, for you're supposed to say, hey, he's a great runner. He's going to take some work in as a thrower, which he could. We haven't seen him under pressure at all,
Sure.
right? We haven't seen him like in a game situation where there's another team on the other side where he's got to, change the call at the line of scrimmage
Sure.
or manufacture a play on the run. We haven't seen that. We've been watching a couple of spring practices, but
Sure.
I mean, he threw a ball the other day. Let me find this note here. I mean, I labeled it all caps, throw of the day. I mean, he's sitting in the pocket.
Yeah.
I think it was like the second to last play of the day, or maybe the second to last session of the day. He's sitting in the pocket. He, three-step drop, sets back, steps on the pocket once. There's a little bit of pressure coming in on him. He steps up, and then he just chucks it down the far
Yeah.
sideline on a post route to shout out to Trent Walker, by the way. Those two
Yeah.
seem to have a pretty good connection. And Walker was open right on the goal line, hit him right in the hands, right in stride. Ball was perfectly thrown for a touchdown. That's the only touchdown, by the way, I've seen in the two practices I've attended here in the spring, which makes it a highlight in and of itself that I actually get to see something entertaining. But that's just one of, a handful of throws that have been kind of wowed by Aiden Childs, because the other quarterbacks, whether they're not attempting those passes, those guys really haven't attempted chucking the ball down the field all that much from the limited reps I've seen of them. But Childs did, and Childs was on point, and he's he's exciting. I see why the coaches are so high on him. I see why he's a 4-star, and I see why everyone's really excited to see this guy play.
Well, and it's pretty crazy to think this kid should be enjoying his senior of high school right now, TJ.
Right.
It should
Isn't
be,
prom in like a month?
yeah, he should be getting ready for prom, man. Instead, hitting the ground running, competing with Oregon State. And, obviously, great stuff on Childs, based on what you've said these last couple practices. He's kind of been the standout of sorts. And as you mentioned, when you wrote depth on Tuesday, check it out at BeaversEdge.com. The interesting thing was in the first, practices of the first session, TJ, especially even day one, it's very interesting because like day one of spring is when we saw just how far DJ and Aiden could throw the ball, which was like, uncorking it really far down the field. That's when the oohs and the ahs of DJ kind of started. And, from my perspective, we got to see Childs a little bit, but it was mostly a mix of, DJ and Ben that first, few practices of March. And, I think there's going to be a natural progression, DJ learning the offense and, so on and so forth, and Aiden to an extent as well. And I think that's why we've still seen, Ben kind of be in the mix. But TJ, were you just taken aback as much as I was, just from the first time you saw him, just how physically imposing DJ is? He's a big dude out there, big dude at the position, big time arm, and he's got pretty good, foot. Like you don't expect a guy who's 6'4", 241 or 51 pounds without looking at the roster off the top of my head. He's quick.
He's pretty slim, honestly. He's slimmer than I thought. I was expecting him to be a little bulkier. I need to stand next to him first before I can really comment on how imposing he is. Maybe I'll pay a little bit closer attention to that on Tuesday. I was just really just watching him to see like what is he looking like as a quarterback. And again, like him and Ben were like, okay. Ben had a few tough throws as well. DJ wasn't perfect either. Ben threw an interception. DJ almost threw an interception. So you could just, kind of wash that away with those two. But, the physically imposing part, I mean, we watched the Super Bowl, what the Eagles and Jalen Hurts would do on every fourth down and short with the rugby play. I know they were trying to outlaw it in the NFL. It's not outlawed in college football. Why don't you stack everyone on the line of scrimmage and say, hey, DJ, push. Yeah. Like who's pushing that guy backwards for a yard? I'm saying like quarterback speak is honestly one of the most underrated plays in football. I don't think enough teams really utilize it, especially in college when guys aren't taking snaps under center. But DJ, for a guy who at Clemson, I don't believe took all that many snaps under center like most college offenses. He will in this offense. So that opens up the playbook for that and more beneficial. But again, I thought he was kind of slim. Which is a good thing, to be honest. Like if you're too big, that's an issue. But he was a little bit slimmer than I thought he would be.
Yeah, I guess just kind of compared to, Ben's got a little bit of, I'm trying to, describe kind of the body type differences. I mean, Chance Nolan was a little bit of a skinnier guy, kind of long arms. I mean, it's kind of interesting to see kind of, for me, like looking at DJ, I look at him and like, reminds me of Jake Luton, who stood, 6 foot, just really tall, big time arm. And I think, when he really gets an opportunity to kind of learn this offense over the summer, I mean, we're sitting here talking about quarterbacks. I mean, I can't picture a world, TJ, where DJ is not the guy. I mean, we're sitting here discussing it, but what's there to really discuss, Yeah,
he should be. I don't know. He hasn't really like grabbed it yet. He is still learning the offense, as you said. So this is more of a fall discussion. There hasn't been like 100% transparency. There hasn't been that much difference between Ben and DJ in the spring. Like the spring's kind of a mess, right? They want to see a bunch of these young guys. Again, if you go peek at the depth charts we put out, rough estimations, like they're just trying to see some of these guys play, especially along the offensive line, right? They're just trying to let some of these guys play. So there's no real like you're winning a position battle in the spring. I do though have a hard time seeing DJ not winning this quarterback battle, and I think a lot will be telling what Ben Gulbranson decides to do at the end of spring. Right.
Agreed.
He's still if he decides that he wants to go try his luck with another program and thinks he can start there, then we probably when the portal opens up after spring, that would make sense for Ben. I don't think anyone would really trash Ben for that. But then it would be probably more evident that DJ would be the guy. There was a question though asked the first practice I was back at. So I think it was the first practice of the second session. that what Aiden would need to do to win the job outright in the fall as a true freshman, which I was like, well, I don't think that's
Yeah.
happening. I don't know if you
Yeah.
would, if Aiden even became the starter at some point of the year, it would not because you'd be starting on in the first game against San Jose State.
Right. I
So
don't
like,
really, I mean,
but like
I would be shocked.
it's not
Yeah.
out of the question. It's not out of the
Sure.
question, but it's like, yeah, he's got probably got a lot to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting because, at the bare bones crux of it, it's that, DJ still won, maybe not Clemson standard, but quarterbacked a lot of wins in Clemson. And I think we know what his potential is. And, he's obviously got a long way to go as far as, getting the nuances of it, but I think he'll pick it up quicker than we think. And I think come spring showcase, spring game, when Oregon State's really pumping up this year. And speaking of which, anyone who wants to go, definitely get out there. They're definitely piping it up as being a little bit more of an event this year, maybe more of a game as opposed to a glorified scrimmage. I think you're going to see him, make some plays that have Oregon State fans excited because you think about like most marquee transfers in college football this offseason. DJ's, at worst top 10 probably, if not, top
Mm-hmm.
5 and more. And I think that brings notoriety to your program, big time, energy level. And, we go back to Jonathan Smith before the start of spring when he mentioned that, season ticket renewals are off the charts compared to where they were. And just that's the impact of getting a big time quarterback. And I think
Mm-hmm.
barring something completely unforeseen, he didn't come to ride the bench, TJ. You know what I
No,
mean?
he didn't. No, he did not. So that'll be interesting. Speaking of transfers, something I hadn't
Yes.
even thought about until it got brought up. So Chance is still in the portal.
Yes. As far as I know, I haven't specifically, if you want to filibuster for a minute here, TJ, I can take a look.
Well,
But
I'm
as far as
peeking
I
right
know,
here. Auburn have reached out to him yesterday, apparently,
interesting.
or yesterday it was reported they reached out to him. But I honestly didn't even think about it until we brought it up here. So
Hmm.
yeah, you got
Yeah, I
me.
mean, for the longest time, I had heard that he was going to wait until sometime closer to summer, but I unsubstantiated
So
um
still
sourcing of
is he officially in the portal, or is he going to enter the portal after spring, finish up here at Oregon State, and then go?
as far as I know, you can be both. I think you can be in the portal and still be finishing school and just not like officially do it.
Right.
Um, but again, I'm not entirely sure what his how he finished out academically and all those other things. But
Right.
yeah, it'd be interesting to see where he ultimately ends up. As obviously Tristan Gebbia, very quick to land at Ohio State, and that was a done thing. It seemed like I think January, but yeah, regardless, the transfer portal just keeps on spinning. But a couple other things in spring. Other than the quarterbacks, which is good, fascinating stuff, TJ, and I think it's going to be real interesting to see over the just two more opportunities, one more practice, and then the spring game for us to see just how much that growth continues to be there from Childs, DJ, and then to an extent, what Ben Gulbranson can do to continue to kind of fight them off, so to speak. And I know recently somebody asked us on the board that we hadn't mentioned Travis Throckmorton a whole lot, and it's only because I haven't
It's
really seen
not
him
really
be in the
playing.
mix. Yeah, I haven't really seen him be in the mix a whole lot. Obviously, the quarterback individual drills and whatnot, but there's that pecking order is pretty clearly DJ, Ben, Aiden, and then potentially you've got Don Montiel in the mix, you've got Travis Throckmorton in the mix, and I think that just kind of crowds the room a little bit.
Yeah, those guys haven't been getting any live reps in any sort
Yeah,
of team drills. It is those top three, and that's it, right?
yeah,
So
and
if Travis Throckmorton came in and made a great throw, I promise you we'd say something about it. But he
yeah,
has
for
not he's
sure.
not gotten any opportunities.
But obviously, a couple other position groups of note. The offensive line's coming along well. If there was a position group, I would tell Beaver fans, you don't really have to worry about. It's the offensive line, barring injury or something like that. They bring back, four of the five starters from last year. Marco Brewer was a starter before going down midseason with the injury. So really, they bring back five guys who had played at least 6 games last year, started at least 6 games. I saw you wrote about Grant Stark getting in with the mix this last week, the Nevada transfer. he's kind of that plug and play guy who I think could be an immediate playmaker. Otherwise, TJ, the offensive line is in fine shape. I mean, no worries there. And with the running back and offensive line situation, Beavers should feel really good about just their bare bones identity going into next season. The
Mm-hmm.
entire backfield is back. I say that a bit surprised because, a lot can happen between now and August, but one guy, the Beavers did really well this last year at kind of sharing the sugar and, keeping the workload spread out. But I still wouldn't have been surprised to see somebody behind Damian maybe take a look around. But yet, nevertheless, all four guys back in the mix. And I think with that running back and that offensive line, it's going to take a ton of pressure off DJ in that passing game.
It sounds like there's some guys in the offensive line that are a little banged up.
Yeah.
Jake Levengood said that if you go listen to the conversation the media had with him on BeaversEdge.com and on our YouTube, he did mention that they're not 100% healthy. So might not see all the guys out there that you want to see participating in the spring. But yeah, there isn't much worry there. We haven't even gotten that much of a look at the running backs either. It's April, right? So they're not going to have them go running through tackles.
Exactly.
You'll get about 10 yards and then the whistle blows. So even if the play was developing nice, you'll just kind of shrug your shoulders. But it's mostly been a mix of Damian, Deshaun, and Jam, I think, in the top three. Now, there hasn't been a real definitive one, but for the most part, it's been those three sitting there with the two top quarterbacks.
Yeah, and we've obviously seen some moves from with Jack Velling not participating in spring. We've seen some Jake Overman at tight end. We've seen some Carter Newman. We've seen kind of a whole bunch of guys kind of rotating in there. I think even with the loss of Luke Musgrave, obviously, in this season, even though he only played in 2 games, still a tight end to replace, and the experience that Jack Velling got, I think having him, out spring definitely will be interesting to kind of open the door and see if anybody else behind Jake Overman, who obviously is a very established commodity, can kind of rise up. And I'm curious to see how that, most particularly, you wrote, Jermaine Terry was with the mix this last week in the Cal transfer. Certainly have heard good things about him. He's got great size, brings just a big time frame to that receiving area, like just massive.
It sounds like they almost like him as a receiver.
Yeah,
not even just a tight end, like a big receiver.
I've heard the same thing. Yeah, I've heard the same thing. And, with that and tight end coming to be well, and I think, receiver as well with, the starting lineup kind of looking like Anthony Gould, Silas Bolden, and John Dunmore, at least at this point. Obviously, the Beavers want to have more passing production, TJ. That's something we talked about last year. We pinned what's a number? We pinned probably 85% of the passing struggles on the quarterback position last year. Do we think that now, if the quarterback position is improved, which we think it greatly is, are the receivers in place good enough to deliver the season that we think that we can? Because if there was one area this offseason where I was like, it was not pursuing maybe a bona fide portal receiver.
Right.
Am I off base a little bit there?
No, not really. But if you go back and listen to Silas Bolden, Anthony, we got to talk to, I think the 2 days I've been there, we've talked to both Silas Bolden and Anthony Gould, and they're very confident in their abilities to produce out wide as a wide receiver, despite them both being, shorter in stature, which I believe, watching them last year, those guys are open quite often, right? You don't need to be big to be open. You just need to be open, essentially.
Good route running.
But I think
route running, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to the fact that, hey, if they really are that high on Jermaine Terry and you get Jack Velling back in the fold as a true receiving tight end, they're your two big bodies, right? And John Dunmore is pretty big too. So, no one's standing out there 6'5", 6'6", going one-on-one outside to box a receiver. But there is still size there for whoever ends up starting a quarterback to throw to outside of Anthony Gould and Silas Bolden. Like it is there. It's not like there's a lack of those options on the roster.
Sure. And I think just kind of the thing that goes to, using Terry and Velling is obviously a great example. But, it's just interesting because when you break it down, the Beavers have not had a go to, hey, it is, 4th and goal, game on the line. I'm going to throw it to this guy because he's going to come down with it. Receiver since Isaiah Hodgins. And, you look at, what did you just say, TJ? 6'5"? Isaiah Hodgins was what, 6'4"? Something like that. So, I think, the kind of searching for that big bodied receiver was, something that I think outsiders, would certainly continue to, kind of mention as a point of issue and concern. But as you mentioned, Jermaine Terry, I think he stands 6'5", just off the top of my head. Jack Belling right there close, and Dunmore obviously a big body. It's interesting because one of the bigger bodies of the receiver room in Micaiah Tongue moved over to inside linebacker this
And he
offseason
looks
too.
good.
So yes, and we'll flip over to the defense momentarily.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see how the receiver all ends up shaking out. What we saw from Anthony Gould and Silas Bolden last year, I really liked. And John Dunmore, what he showed us in the bowl game, I particularly liked as well. Whether or not, it was the quarterback fully or receivers needed to, be better route runners, be better at getting open. That was the hands-on debate last year was, are the receivers not getting open, or is it the quarterback, throwing into coverage, or, whatever it was. So I think that's going to be a very interesting storyline to keep an eye on, and who emerges potentially at receiver. Any of the young guys stand out to you, TJ? So far, Zach Card, at least in the first
I'll
month,
say
was really keep an eye on him, folks. Zach Card's, he could be playing right away.
Yeah, I've been trying to. It's been a little hard for me to focus on the younger guys because I'm honestly still trying to catch up with numbers. Like I have,
Sure, yeah,
it
right.
is.
It's
Everyone's
lot.
got new numbers, so it could be your head swimming when you're trying to just track everyone down. It's like, oh look, it's Omar Spates at running back. Oh wait, no, it's Deshaun Fenwick.
Right. No,
So
Armar's in Baton Rouge now, TJ. He
yeah,
gone.
yeah, yeah,
He
yeah, 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 yeah.
he maybe turncoat
Eating
a
some
little bit.
gumbo. Hey,
Turncoat,
good, good for him good for him for getting that bag. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think
he
the only
got
one
it. I
that's
mean,
really
hey, I never
the
blame a
only
guy for taking the money and running, man. It is what it is. You got to
well,
get that money. Got to get it.
yeah, the only guy that the coach never really mentioned is Zach Card. So I've been
Yeah,
trying to. I would say like in the spring game will probably be the best opportunity to get a look at him. But
most
he's a
definitely.
guy that Anthony Gould's like, yeah, he looks a lot like me. Like he does. So it's
Yeah,
like, well, Beaver fans will be like, and he's like, yeah, he's a lot farther along at this stage of his career than I was. So just think of how much better he'll be. So similar mold. Hey, maybe he ends up taking Anthony's spot as a returner as well. He's
yeah, that
fast.
could be key as well.
He'll yeah, I don't know. He should be getting open deep, but he I didn't see as much from him on Tuesday's practice. I don't know if he got targeted at all or if he made
Yeah,
really any good catches. I would have noted it if he
yeah.
did. So, but yeah, I'd say he's the one young guy really to keep an eye on here.
Yeah, he definitely has made some exciting plays, throughout the course of spring. And, like you said, I think, this year it might be more desirable. As good as Anthony Gould is as a returner, you have to balance whether or not you want him to be taking those hits, because Anthony Gould, you're not having him out there typically to do fair catches, right? I mean, if there's no option, of course he's going to fair catch. But I believe he had 3 touchdowns this last year, 2 or 3 punt return touchdowns this last year, and that's the weapon that he is, TJ. And I think
Mm-hmm.
you have to balance that because Anthony Gould got dinged up late in the year, didn't end up playing in the bowl game, so he's, as you mentioned, not the biggest body out there, so you have to
Mm-hmm.
always kind of balance that as well. So I think Zach Card could certainly work his way in, but. Going back to your interviews real quick, last point on the offense where we switch gears to the defense. Your interview with Silas Bolden this week, I forget which media member in the scrum asked, but they're like, do you kind of take it like as a slight when people go, the receiving core needs more size? And he's like, no, not really, which,
It was
I can appreciate.
it was the so I think that was Les Garrett of the Albany
Yeah.
Democrat Herald that asked that question. And the thing is, like, I think Les was asking it. I don't know if it was like he wasn't like chasing a sound bite, but
No, no,
you
no.
try to you would think Silas just says, yeah, like we try and keep a chip on our shoulder if someone says, yeah, our receiver room's not big enough. But Silas was like answered it like a total pro. He's like, no, don't even think about it.
Yeah, I
Like,
know,
no.
right? It was
I was
clutch.
like, I was kind of surprised that the answer was that short, but had to
Yeah.
Silas.
It's a total pro move, right? That's having an older brother that taught you how to deal with the media, right? But switching gears and wrapping up the podcast, talking about the defense. Obviously there are a couple big storylines coming into fall camp, particularly whether or not defensive line would take another step forward. With a lot of guys mostly returning and kind of some internal reinforcement, so to speak, how they would replace inside linebacker with Omar Spates, as we mentioned, departing to LSU, and Tyree Fisher-Morris running out of eligibility. And then the back end. We'll start with the inside linebackers. From what I was able to see, John Miller really looks like he's going to lock down one of those inside linebacker spots, at least early on. The pride of Tualatin, Oregon, just down the road here. So shout out Tualatin, Oregon, and the Miller family. He's been a guy, been in the program for a couple years. It's been nice to see him kind of get his shot. He looks good. And then Easton Mascarenas is really kind of, looks like he's going to kind of be the guy for that spot once the season comes around. Those guys, based on what I've seen from TJ's notes, haven't been getting as much run in April as they did necessarily in March, but I think those are kind of the leaders in the clubhouse, so to speak. I think the defensive line is looking better, even though, they lost Simon Sandberg. I think internal development, guys like Isaac Hodgins feel they're going to be even better and more efficient this next year. Obviously bringing in some reinforcements as well. The secondary is still the area that I'm a little curious about. I think Jaden Robinson is definitely a guy to keep an eye on back there.
Right.
A couple other guys, Trice Ivy, the JUCO transfer who comes in from college to San Mateo. Alton Julian, when he eventually returns to action, is going to be in that mix as well. He's not playing in the spring. Skylar Thomas, as you talked to earlier this week, TJ, he's been playing some good ball recently.
Had an interception on Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, I guess, on early thoughts anyway, on how Trent Bray is going to go about retooling this defense? Because on one side of the football, we feel the offense could take a step forward this next year. The defense, it's going to be really hard to maintain the level that they were last year. Some slippage is expected and probably is reasonable, but how does Trent Bray keep that in the top half, TJ, being the top ranked defense this last year while working in so many faces?
Well, he's got to have a good pass rush. Been a little hard to judge the pass rush because whenever they get near the quarterback, they either don't whistle it when I think it's a sack, but they don't whistle anything, and I'm like, oh, that's a sack. And then
sack.
Aiden Childs keeps running, and I'm like, well, okay, I guess it's not a sack. So I don't know if the defense actually executed correctly on that play.
It's true.
I thought the secondaries looked good, to be honest. The only times they've been burned was by Childs in last practice. Otherwise, they've been in there in pass coverage pretty well. I mean, Jaden Robinson's looked good. Skylar Thomas has been making a bunch of really good plays, playing safety next to Katana Oladapo, who also hasn't really been getting as much run here in April. Was he playing in March?
Yeah, he was getting pretty much we saw a good mix of everybody who didn't who Jonathan said, other than who Jonathan says wasn't going to play. I don't think we saw a ton of Anthony Gould, but he played one practice. There was mostly everyone who we thought was going to get in the mix played, but you know how it is. A guy like Katana Oladapo, you're you want to play, really tough or really intense once every fourth practice, right? There's just no need to have your veterans pushing themselves at all,
Right. So other guys back there, Achille Arnold has been playing some safety as well. He's been in there. Ryan Cooper on the other side at corner. So those are the guys I've seen really starting. The guys who have really made plays while I've been there is Achille Arnold and Skylar Thomas. Right. They've each had a really nice interception both the games. It's been kind of hard to judge the pass rush, and the linebackers, they can't really touch anybody.
Right.
Unlike the defensive backs actually getting to swat the football away and strip the football out and stick their hand in the receiver's face to pop a ball out. So that's probably been the best measure of that. I say Micaiah Tung's made some plays, right? He looks like the right kind of athlete for that linebacker position. He's gotten a couple pass breakups. He looks very fast. Maybe he's a little undersized for the position, but a little stick, too much of a not built out enough. But he's still got a full summer if he's going to put on more weight. But regardless, I thought he's looked solid there as well. So I still think it's a pretty enticing group. I saw Malachi Donaldson get a sack the other day.
Yes.
That was encouraging to see from the sophomore. Can't remember who else I said had a sack here. I'm going to try and see if anyone else really
Sure.
got a
Yeah.
good amount of
Yeah.
who's I wrote down 43. I forget off the top of my head who 43 is.
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing that was in a
oh,
couple
that's
guys.
you know what? I'm just going to pull it up while you talk.
Go for it. The couple guys that stood out to me during March, especially in the secondary, Ian Massey had a couple nice plays early in March. I saw he's had a couple good days back there, and also Jack Conne as well. Called his name for a couple springs now as kind of a young guy who's gotten into the mix, and
Mm-hmm.
it's as far as edge rushers go, Drew
There's
Chatfield, obviously.
Takari Hickle,
Yeah.
by the way.
Yeah, Takari. Yeah, I mean, obviously a guy who people were very excited when he signed. So I think if they can improve the pass rush this year, which Trent Bray talked about, I think it was the first time we talked to him as being one of the top priorities of the offseason, I think Oregon State will be in a good spot because while you won't have nearly as many veteran presences to maybe cover up you know, some of the misses and assignments here or there, or the fact that the pass rush wasn't great, I think you're able to overcome that with great secondary play. Now it'll maybe even out a little bit where maybe you won't have quite as good, just elite play in the back end, but you'll have a better pass rush, so it'll even out. So I think
Right.
that's what the Beavers are going to try to hope for this year. The sack rate was not great at all last year. And I think you look at wow, Oregon State first. Oh, it was kind of just a crooked number that didn't go with the rest of the defense.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's definitely a priority and something we're going to be keeping an eye on. But just to kind of wrap up the podcast, TJ, obviously we'll have to get back to the mix this next week with one more practice before the spring game concludes next Saturday, a week from this Saturday is recording this podcast on a Thursday. But, so far so good from what we've seen from Oregon State. This is they're definitely continuing to, make progress off of the 10-win campaign we saw a year ago. It is, for lack of better terms, they just look like I don't want to say big time, but just bigger than they were football program, TJ, the way
Yeah.
that they conduct themselves, the way that they talk, the way that they act, they carry themselves like a 10-win football team, and it is noticeable, and it's created a buzz for Oregon State football that, like I said earlier, we haven't seen in probably 20 years. So definitely continue to stay locked into BeaversEdge.com. And TJ, it's going to be fun to get back and start talking some football. And we didn't get to it this podcast. We got baseball and some Pac-12 media rights we got to hit on soon as well. So won't be long before we're back, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hanging out with you at the spring game. I think I missed last year's spring game, but I don't think there's anything on the schedule that'll keep me from the spring game this year. So that'll be
good
fun.
Deal. Yeah, no, we're definitely going to have to link up for that for sure. So hear that, folks? We got a double dip on spring game coverage. So we're gonna be bringing it at you. And again, stay tuned to BeaversEdge.com as we'll have coverage of the last two practices or last practice and spring game before the Beavers put a lid on spring football. It seems like it just started, but here we are halfway through April and making some progress. So again, big thanks to TJ Mathewson for jumping on this edition of the Edge podcast. As always, appreciate it, man. And to everyone listening and watching, we appreciate it. Make sure to head on over to BeaversEdge.com for all the latest Oregon State sports coverage.